Hi everybody, Colin Stevenson here, joined by my hero John Lenhart. Hi John.
Hi.
Today we're talking about trauma, John, and trauma is a massive, massive thing with people and in the world at the moment. A lot of people don't understand where it comes from. They don't understand how to deal with it, and they also don't understand how to kind of work through it depending on their intangible driver also. You know, I'm compassion server. I can easily keep to my server and move forward all the time. The minute that I take that step back into compassion, and we will talk going forward, we'll talk about this. All it needs is I need to feel that last previous thing that happened to me, and I will live there. And I will keep moving forward, taking it with me, like the ball and chain. So if you can talk to me about, or talk to us about the amygdalae, please, because this is where I believe that the trauma comes from to begin with.
Right. So in our brain, we have two almond-shaped neural structures. That's where they get the term almond or amygdalae. So one of them is amygdala, two of them are amygdalae. And they have a library of all of our emotional and feeling perspectives we've ever had, even since the womb. So it's got a record of everything. And the way I like to look at the amygdalae is I like to see it as a person that's in a room with no doors, no windows, and they have a computer and they're just able to Google experiences. So they don't, it doesn't really know reality because it is cut off from the outside world. All it knows is what it's told. And basically the way it works 99% of the time is your unconscious looks around and it says, I'm going to need, basically what happens is your unconscious looks around and it sends these terms to your amygdalae. I'm in, Wisconsin, it's a Wednesday, it's April, it's noon. And it sends all that information to the amygdalae. The amygdalae does a Google search of all those terms, basically all those terms. And it's looking for what I call an exclamation point. It's looking for a time when something dramatic happened. Yep. If nothing comes up, then it Googles 4 of those 5 terms, then 3 of those 5 terms, then 2, then 1. If everything's fine, which is most of the time, the amygdala then says, okay, the unconscious brain called for a certain heart rate, a certain amount of adrenaline, cortisol, different things. The amygdala looks in the body and says, is it happening? Because if it's not, if what the unconscious is asked for doesn't happen, the amygdala can push a button. So we look at it, the unconscious is like the big picture, driver of our body, leader of our body. The amygdala is a small picture. It can in the moment just push a button and boom, adrenaline, the heart rate, all these things happen. But if everything's fine, then the amygdala kind of passes the request on and it's done. So 99% of the time, your amygdala is just checking how your body's doing and it's passing the information on and everything's fine.
Right, okay, so what you're saying is what we think we are controlling or what we think we can't control at all because the amygdala can't see out of this room. So with the way that I feel that there's certain things that happen in my life that trigger me. So when I get a trigger and I get a trauma, trigger and trauma, they both one comes from another, yeah. So I feel when I'm triggered, that's how it takes me back to a place. So it's like, it doesn't have anything to do with the situation that happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago. All it does is it Google searches the same thing as I did. Right, okay, that makes sense because there's still things, and I know we'll probably talk about it in the next video, but there are still things that I trigger with in life. None of us are perfect. So I would like to know more about how to obviously understand it better.
Right, so that's what we're talking about right here. So what most people know about the amygdala is fight or flight. So the way that looks, for example, I know a woman, she's tall, blonde hair, and she went to teach in a group home. So a bunch of these teenagers that have gotten in trouble. And she walked in the room the first time, and this kid towards the back of the room just started coming over the chairs and coming at her, trying to attack her. She walked in the room and they just went off. Well, what happened was that kid saw a tall, blonde-haired woman who was in a position of authority, his amygdalae put those terms in and Googled and went, hey, every time, that's his mom. In his brain, his mom's a tall, blonde-haired woman in authority, and she used to always abuse him. So he was like, I better fight her before she fights me. Now, that's not his mom, but it doesn't matter. The amygdalae doesn't know reality. The amygdalae just knows, hey, whenever there's a tall, blonde-haired woman who's in authority, we need to defend ourselves. And he went and took off and tried to defend himself. So the thing is when the amygdalae fires, the body kicks in adrenaline, and then the person they're not able to think in their conscious brain for like 60 to 90 seconds. So it is possible for a person, like if you and I were sitting down, at a restaurant or something, and we're, having a drink, and someone walks in and I walk over, I kill that person. I walk back, I sit down with you, I reabsorb the adrenaline, and then I go, hey, Colin, what happened to that guy? You'd be like, you just killed him. I don't remember that. I didn't kill him. And so I've gotten in trouble with some women's groups because when these guys abuse women, they're like, they wanted to abuse her. And it's like, he may not have known what he did. He may have had a triggering experience that completely blocked out his brain, and he went and did that. And there's a movie, A Christmas Story with Ralphie, that's one of the best examples of triggering, where he's walking home from school, he gets hit by a snowball, and he goes off, and the narration says, a fuse blew and I went out of my skull. And he goes after the bully and he's beating him up. And only after 60 seconds does he say, I suddenly became conscious of a steady stream of obscenities coming out of my mouth. So for 60 seconds, he doesn't remember any of that. He was not conscious at all. So that's the thing, is that amygdalae kicks in, it takes over, and we're not conscious at all.
So if there's a situation, for talking sake, between you and I, and what happens is I don't remember anything for the first 60 seconds. So you say something that triggers me for the first 60 seconds, I won't remember. So I could be saying or doing something that I'm not conscious of. When I become conscious, you will then be retaliating to whatever I have said. And that is usually what carries things on, as opposed to me knowing what I was doing in the first place.
Right. So when we help these teachers in the room, what we say is, when a kid triggers, we say, start a stopwatch, get the other kids away from that person so they're safe, make sure the kid is safe, and then wait 60 to 90 seconds before you interact with them. If you interact with them, you start the stopwatch over again, because it's another triggering event, and they keep going. The person can't keep themselves going. So flight, an example of flight is, and I was helping a guy, he was in his 50s. This is a number of years ago. He lived in another state. And when I was explaining all this to him, he goes, oh, you just explained something that happened to me last month. He was walking into a sporting goods store. There was a cigar out in front on the trash can that he smelled it. And he took one step in the sporting goods store, and the next thing he remembers, he was standing by his car back in the parking lot out of breath. He doesn't remember how he got from one step in the sporting goods store to back in the parking lot. Well, what happened was he smelled the cigar smoke. He saw a fishing vest, and a guy walked by him with 5 o'clock shadow. He was sweaty and he was wearing a certain cologne. And this guy's amygdalae Googled basically cigar smoke, fishing vest, sweaty, 5 o'clock shadow, male, and this cologne. And 5 for 5, basically every time he's encountered that, he got molested. He used to go on a fishing trip with an uncle every year. The uncle used to molest him, smoking a cigar, wearing a fishing vest, doing all this stuff. Now, this guy's, it's like 38 years later, 38, 40 years later, his amygdalae doesn't know that this is 40 years later. All his amygdalae knows is 5 for 5, this has happened, take off. And it caused him to take off and blacked him out and caused him to take off.
Can this happen if, for talking sake, an abusive partner? Like, it could be the partner that's triggering them and they don't realize they're doing it, and then once it goes off, the reaction is going to be however they feel with feeling triggered. So it's not necessarily saying that they want to come out and abuse somebody or be bad to somebody.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people trigger more than what we realize when we're talking with people, because we're humans. When we're talking with people and they're like, boy, they didn't hear any of that. They trigger. These people literally don't remember we said certain things during a conversation. They, might have felt like we were making them feel stupid and they triggered. And for 60 seconds, they didn't hear a word of what we said. So the third response actually is freeze. So if you think about it, if the amygdala does its search and fight comes up and flight comes up, what's the person going to do? You can't take off and go at the person.
Yeah.
You freeze. And what I like to teach people is freeze is not really a response. Freeze is two responses fighting, fight or flight. And what's going to happen is one of them is going to decrease and the other is going to happen. So when a kid freezes or a person freezes and you turn your back, if the flight decreases, you're going to get hit in the head with a chair because the fight's going to take off. Or if the fight decreases, you're going to turn around and they're gone. Where'd they go? And I have these people go, well, he froze. So why'd you well, he froze. So I turned around to do something else and then he was gone. Yeah. Because he froze because it was fight or it was fight and flight.
Yeah.
And the thing is whenever someone freezes, I always say, be careful. This is not over yet. You're waiting for one of them to decrease so you know which one's going to end up happening. And you need to be ready either way, whether they go to fight or flight.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. So when I've got a thing with heights, if I'm safe and I know that I'm going to be safe up a height, I am fine. If I'm going to need to I'll put that back, right? Thank you. If I am up a ladder and I know there's a potential that I'm not safe, this is where I freeze. And it's not because I'm not capable of climbing up the rest of the ladder or climbing down. It's just that it's part of me saying you're not safe, don't move, and the other part saying fight against it. Right, okay, that makes complete sense because as I say, I'm fine. I can go on all the big rides at, fairs and all the big kind of roller coasters, all these things, because I know that I'm in strapped. It's the moment that I don't feel secure that makes me freeze.
Right. So the way this happens, how does that get in the amygdala in the first place? The way it happens is our first experience with anything determines it. And the example I like to use is a TV show over here, Modern Family, that's no longer around, but there's this great scene where Phil Dunphy, this one character, has a fear of clowns. And he kind of freezes whenever they're around. And one time he's like, I can't do this anymore. And he takes off. But so he's got a trigger with clowns. And at one point he's looking in a oneer, just him and the camera. And he goes, not really sure, why I have this fear. My mom says I found a dead clown in the forest, but I don't remember it. So his first experience seeing a clown was a dead one in the forest. And he doesn't remember it. He triggered in a sense. But now every time, if you think about it, every time he sees a clown, his brain Google searches it, it comes up, dead clown in the forest, and he feels that emotion. So that's the issue, is if our first experience with something is bad, every time we experience it afterwards, our brain's going to search it and bring up that experience. So that's where, especially with kids 0 to 4 years old, we want to help them with their first experience being good. Their first experience with anything, we want to make sure it's good. Because once it's bad, now we're fighting an uphill battle because they had this first bad experience.
So on that subject, is it possible that people go through a situation together, one person triggers, and then what happens is they think the person's done something when they haven't because they're triggering?
Right.
So, because that makes a lot of sense, because I've seen people having a normal conversation. I worked in bars and pubs for a long time, and you saw that everything going, and all it took was one or two things to happen that would normally not trigger anybody else. And then that's where the fight blew up, and that's where people were crying, or the couple fell out, or these type of things. So that makes sense. So that it doesn't necessarily have to be done. It could be 2 or 3 things that are going on round about you that cause you to trigger, and you'll instantly think it's the person that's in front of you that's done it.
Right. So the thing is remember, we talk about In order to trigger, we call that 320, you have to first be at 160. You have to be, Ralphie walking home from school is in 160. He's just drifting. He's not focused on anything. He's just kind of floating like a zombie. Then you have that one external event. Now, we've been working with Dr. Ellie Harper, and one of the things, she says there's 4 things that Flowsess has that psychology doesn't have. And one of them is this idea of emotions and feelings. So emotions, there's only 4 emotions: happy, sad, mad, and fear. Those are all things we feel for a known cause. When someone says, I'm happy, why are you happy? Well, I don't know. They know why they're happy. They know why they're sad. Emotions, you know why you were feeling that thing. And that's in your conscious brain. That's 80. There's, over 30 feelings. Yep. Jealousy, envy, guilt, frustration, irritation. There's all these feelings. Those are all in the unconscious brain. Now, the amygdalae get information from the unconscious and the conscious. It's just that it's always getting information from the unconscious. So if you think about it, 90% of our brain is the unconscious. 90% of what we feel are feelings, not emotions. So that's why, all of that is from the unconscious. The things that are emotions get sent to the amygdalae, but this is only based on a decision. So if you think about it, what happens is if I say, Colin's a good guy, that's not a decision, but I'm thinking that doesn't get sent to the amygdalae. And then I say, I like having lunch with Colin. That's not a decision. I'm going to ask Colin to lunch. That gets sent to the amygdalae from my conscious brain, because your unconscious is always making decisions in response. But now they get sent to the amygdalae. My amygdalae goes lunch with Colin, and it looks at all these things, and I could trigger over that decision, and it could kick out adrenaline. So notice what happens.
It gives me anxiety.
Right. This is what anxiety is.
Right.
So
okay.
if I sit there and say, my boss is going to fire me and I'm going to have to look for a new job, that's a decision. I'm going to have to look for a new job. When I send that to my amygdalae, it sends out adrenaline. And then I go, and then people are going to be, looking down on me, and then I'm going to have to hide. That's another decision. Send it to the amygdalae, it kicks out more adrenaline. I can make like 5 or 6 decisions in less than 2 seconds. That each decision is a separate event. The amygdalae sends adrenaline for each decision, and all of a sudden my heart starts racing. I start having a panic attack. And the only way that my body can save my life is it has a default setting, which is I pass out. So my body knows, look, we can't stop that person's mind from making all these decisions in their conscious brain. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass out. And I pass out because if I kept going, I can give myself a heart attack. I could start thinking so hard and so quickly that my adrenaline and everything, my heart's just going to explode. So that's what an anxiety attack is. It's a different type of triggering. And notice it's a ramping up. So a trigger, like what we were talking about through the unconscious, is 0 to 100. Ralphie's walking home from school, he gets hit by a snowball. He's immediately at 100%.
Yep.
And he never goes up or down for that, and he's unreachable. What I just talked about is a bunch of decisions, and everything's an event. So this is one of the areas we really help teachers, because I don't think anybody has this training. People will say when someone's triggering, sometimes you can reach them, sometimes you can't. When they're triggering at 320, you can't. When they're ramping up at 80, that you can. People just don't know how to see the difference between them. So when teachers take our course, what happens is this kid was, threw a chair, and then he looks, and every time he did something, he looked and he grabbed, this folder, and he threw it. And then he looked and he grabbed his computer and he picked it up. And the teacher said, do you want to pay for that? And the kid looked at the computer, put it down, and then he walked over and kicked something else. And it's like that teacher knew the kid was at 80 because everything he looked at was a decision, versus if he was at 320, he would have just broken anyways. And so it's really important that you know the difference between someone triggering through their unconscious at 320
Yeah.
and someone ramping up anxiety, 80 through their conscious brain.
Yeah. So we can see that in ourselves. So if we start to feel that we are triggering, and we're going to go on to how to mute the triggers and how to, bring down the anxiety and stuff like that on the next show that we do. But what I'm saying is that people don't realize before they take a panic attack, as you say, they're ramping up, they're making the events happen. So it's about kind of channeling through their body, their mind, to get them to recognize it early to stop them then getting to that level.
Right. So the last thing I'll say is one of the things I teach people with the anxiety side is I like to see it as you have all this emotion and you're holding on to it and you're going to have this encounter with somebody. And what happens is if you say to them, you said this mean thing to me and it made me sad. A little bit of that emotion, they're going to feel that emotion and a little bit of that emotion is going to leak out. And after 2 or 3 sentences, the emotion's all out and they're really upset or they're crying. And I've had people say, how do I hold on to my composure when I have this interaction? And what I say is your amygdalae doesn't recognize questions as a decision. Mm-hmm. So if you have that entire interaction through questions, if you say, why did you say this thing to me? Do you know how it made me feel? You can hold all your emotion. So this is why the communication guidance becomes really important. Our brain works on words and sentences. And if you use those words and sentences the right way, you remain in control of your brain and your emotions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm looking forward to the next one to find out how we can mute these anxieties and mute, these triggers, because I do believe that you said a trigger can't be taken away. We can only mute it so we can't hear or feel it. And it can remain there for the rest of your life because we can't remove it from the amygdala. So I'm really looking forward to that, so that I can then help people and people can help themselves. So thank you so much. And I look forward to speaking to you next time. Cheers, John.
Bye.
If you should receive it. Okay, right, that's fine. I need to edit that.